Next, we have Molly Crabapple, distinguished graphic novelist, as well as something of a war zone reporter. Her last book was co-authored with a Syrian journalist, a friend of mine, called Marwan Hisham. It's called Brothers of the Gun, and it's available outside from the Word bookshop. Now, Molly's going to talk about how to combine visual art and journalism. Molly.
Hey guys, Molly Crabapple. Before I start, I want to just correct a little misnomer. I'm not a graphic novelist. No slight to the amazing comics artists in the audience. I don't have their work ethic. I do single panel illustrations like these. But to talk about what I do, I'm an artist and a journalist who uses my I use my sketch pad kind of like photojournalists use their camera. I've covered conflict zones around the world, including in Syria, as well as covering issues like migrant workers in Abu Dhabi, Guantanamo Bay, the border. And so I've covered issues like Gaza, Guantanamo Bay, the plight of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, when the whole island was destroyed and nothing was being done about it. But the project that brought me here today, and probably the thing that I'm best known for, is I did a collaboration with a brilliant Syrian journalist named Marwan Hisham, who, after ISIS invaded his hometown of Raqqa, he decided to stay and work undercover as a journalist. Now, I want to talk to you a bit about the point of what art can do for journalism and what art can do that makes it different than photography. The first thing about art, and the first special power that art has, is that power doesn't like cameras. You might notice that there aren't a lot of cameras, right, in checkpoints. There aren't a lot of cameras in internment camps, and there aren't a lot of cameras in prisons, or at least not ones that aren't run by the state. What I've been able to do is to use my sketchbook in some of the most censored places in the world, whether the prisons at Guantanamo Bay, or whether in the kangaroo courts on the US-Mexican border, where 14-year-olds are forced to represent themselves against the Department of Homeland Security. I've been able to use my sketchpad to literally draw around censorship, whether that means in Guantanamo Bay, replacing guards' heads with smiley faces, so I got past the prison censor, or whether that means drawing so much in courts on the border that a special ruling was created for me, a special rule that said that unauthorized sketching was forbidden. And I had to sketch with words in the courtrooms. Now, besides getting around censorship, art has another power, which is that it can keep people safe and it can keep people anonymous. And this, I think, was one of the reasons that Marwan was initially attracted to me when we were working together in Syria. Marwan, when we met, it was 2014, we met on Twitter. And he sent me photos that he had taken surreptitiously in ISIS-occupied Raqqa. Now, I want you to think a bit about the courage of what this means, right? We all know how much ISIS loved objective chronicling of their brutality and their reign. So he was risking death sending me these photos, which then I would conceal people's identity in them and I would draw from them. And we initially published these in Vanity Fair. We later repeated this from Mosul, which was occupied by ISIS, and then from rebel-held East Aleppo. Now, the other motivation for drawing, as opposed to photography, is that we live in a time when we are so glutted with images. Every single time a policeman knocks a protester over the head, 1,000 iPhones, right, are raised, and click, 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 click. I mean, that's why forensic architecture can do the amazing work that they do, because of this full spectrum images that we have. However, this amount of images also creates a numbness amongst viewers. It creates a sort of jadedness amongst viewers, and they're like, you see so much blood and you see so much death, especially on social media, and it makes viewers eventually not care. And so what I try to do with my artwork is I try to force my way past that jadedness. When you draw, it is obviously defiantly subjective. It's obviously filtered through another person. It obviously has gone through someone's eye, out their hands. It's saying, look, I put care into this, and you should care as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about some of my techniques when I was doing Brothers of the Gun, which is the book that I did with Marwan Hisham that we co-wrote together and that I illustrated, which was about the Syrian revolution, the Syrian war, and the ISIS occupation. Because usually when I work, I'm there. I'm there taking photos that I later draw from, or I'm there with my sketchbook. And when Marwan and I worked together in Raqqa, when Marwan and I worked together from Raqqa, when he was sending me photos, even though I wasn't there, I was working directly from photos. I could see, kind of what was in front of me. But when we did Brothers of the Gun, there were no photos that I could work from. These were scenes that Marwan could not have taken documentation of, things like when ISIS guys took over his uncle's internet cafe and turned it into their place to Skype back home with their relatives in Belgium. Or stuff like when enslaved Yazidi women were brought into that cafe. Or else deep memories like his first days at a religious school. These were things for which no photo reference existed. And so my job as an artist who's trying to work journalistically in Brothers of the Gun was how I could use my pen to excavate Marwan's memories. And this also is one of the most powerful functions of visual art. It's one of the things that I was most inspired by when I saw Joe Sacco's great book, Palestine, that there are all of these events that otherwise would be lost to the memory hole because these events happened when no one had a camera. And yet, as an artist, you could reach back into the past and create a visual representation of them. It's something Joe Sacco did a lot with people's memories of Israeli occupation prisons, and it's something that I did in Brothers of the Gun. Now, how do you do this, right? Like, what is your technique for doing this as an artist? As an example, I'll take an image like, I don't know where it is in the slide deck, so I'm just going to describe it. It was right after an internet cafe belonging to Marwan's uncle was sort of taken over by ISIS. And customers are all of these ISIS guys who have all sorts of gory injuries. And they are all, on their iPads and tablets. And so Marwan and I want to do this. We start with a photo of the internet cafe in happier times when it's empty, so get, the architecture. And then I would interview Marwan, and I'd say, can you tell me about what type of guys came into the cafe? How many usually were there? Where were they from? Was this guy Chechen? Was this guy Azerbaijani? What kind of injuries did they have? And we'd make a list. It would be, okay, an Azerbaijani guy with a stomach injury and a foul expression who liked to sit on this chair. He would always come into the cafe. Or else we would sort of decide this guy should be a dude from Birmingham who has a severed leg, who is addicted to his tablet. And so we'd kind of make a cast of characters, right, that would, that he remembered. And then we'd start honing in. We'd be, how long was the guy's beard? What kind of vest did he wear? And the same way that a journalist who was doing writing would interview Marwan, I would do that. Then I would have him sketch out, like, where everyone stood, right? And I'd even maybe have him take photos of himself so that we could kind of get, like, the posture right or the facial expressions. And then I would do sketches. I would show them to Marwan, and he would say, no, you did this all wrong. This is a cliche. Oh, my God, how could you caricature this guy like this? And I would work and work until I had a sketch that was accurate. And we would check for details, not just like, for instance, how people were sitting, but also to make sure the brand of the energy drink was right, or to make sure that ISIS fighters that were always required to wear their suicide belts were actually wearing their suicide belts. We'd make sure every inch of the drawing was as correct as possible, because I wanted it to be like taking back from Marwan's memory. Now, then there was another type of piece that we would do, which was illustrations of moments that had been chronicled, but hadn't been chronicled in a way that you can print in a book. And the most common of these was a lot of protests that happened in Raqqa. Because these protests, there were tons of people with cell phones. The Syrian war was perhaps one of the most photo-documented wars in human history. But these people with their cell phones were holding them vertically and running, and there was tear gas going around, and it's bad lighting, and everything is blurry. And once you do a freeze frame, it doesn't even look like people anymore. It looks like smudges. You certainly can't get like a giant panoramic picture from anything that was taken there, because these were taken under the worst possible conditions. But we wanted to create work that was iconic, but that was based on these real protests. How do we do that? The first thing that I would do, and this is how I did a picture of the Ali Babinsi protests, which, if we see them here, I'll point them out, is I would look at every single video that was taken, all these blurry videos, right, taken from different angles, and then I would freeze frame them, like every second. And then I'd print all of those seconds out, because, if someone's running, right, like this, they're basically, what they're doing is they're giving you a panorama, if you take all the shots. So I'd print all of these shots out, and they wouldn't look like much, right? They would be, sort of blurry, like smears with tear gas behind them. But once I looked at them all together, once I looked at the totality of them, I would figure out, okay, over here is where there are burning tires. This over here is a guy that's fleeing backwards, and you'd kind of like look at the motions of the crowd, and you'd get this panorama. Then, if the stuff was too blurry to be understandable, I would repose models. So, for instance, if I could see that some guys were dragging off a wounded guy, but I wanted to make sure the anatomy was right and that all the elbows were in the right place and that no one's wrist looked like they were broken, I would repose people. And then I would take all of this montaged art and all of these like montaged screenshots, all of these reposed things, and I would put them all together, and I would create a massive, massive image of what it must have felt like when you were there. And it should be coming up soon. I will point it out when I see it. Because the thing is, and this is the ultimate, in my view, the ultimate purpose of drawing stuff in this age when a pencil and a paper, they seem so archaic. The ultimate purpose is that drawing is slow, and drawing creates a singular image. It creates an iconic image. And in this world where there are so many photos and where there are so many videos and where there's such confusion, that's the image of the protest. Hundreds of screenshots went into this. In a world that creates so much ephemera out of images, drawing can still create the singular, and that's what I try to do with my work. Thank you.